You've reached Hotel Pacifico, your 5-star destination for BC politicos. Press 4 for room service. Press the star key for your hosts Mike McDonald and Kate Hammer.
Welcome back, guests, and welcome back, Mike, to the Lower Mainland. I hope you've got stories for us for the strategy suite, maybe about the speeches at the Natural Resources Forum and the political night scene in Prince George.
Prince George in January. It is one of the top tourist destinations I can name. And our guest today actually is no stranger to Prince George. He used to live there in Victoria. He now lives in Edmonton. And this is a special edition of Hotel Albertico, or however we call it.
Rockies, Pacifico, yeah.
Today we have the Chief of Staff to the Premier of Alberta, Daniel Smith. A gentleman who, with many political types in BC, may need no introduction. The Tyee has described him as a nondescript Victoria native, clean-shaven, silver-haired, in a crisp white button-down shirt.
And for those not watching on YouTube, I would say check, check, check.
Yeah, he's looking particularly natty today. Welcome to the Hotel Pacifico Albertico, Marshall Smith.
Thanks, Mike. It's great to see you. I appreciate that. And indeed, the Tyee does describe me as that, which I think is currently my Twitter bio. I was so impressed with their cleverness. So,
well, I would never question the Tyee's journalism, nor their devotion to fact-based reporting. But I did find the nondescript a little bit. I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure.
Well, look,
nondescript is.
They're really overlooking my commitment to, men's sartoria and other things. So,
among other unique aspects of your personality and career. So I don't even know where to start. Like, how the hell are you in the Chief of Staff office in Alberta?
How did this happen?
How did this happen? What's going on? Like, tell us how you got there. Like, I know you went to Alberta to work in the Jason Kenney government, and then in a flash, you're running the whole show.
Look, you're not alone in wondering how this happened. I mean, I often wonder how this happened, and pinch myself, quite frankly. It's for those that aren't familiar with my story, it goes a little bit something like this. I was a young political staffer in the first term of the Gordon Campbell administration, Mike, and that's where you and I met. And my portfolios at that time as a young staffer were, the Olympic bid, the community charter, municipal affairs, etc. And had a great career, right? It was an exciting time in British Columbia, some great leadership. All the while, though, I was a heavy drinker, right? It's clear in retrospect, I was an alcoholic at the time. Managed to have no problem getting through my day and was very productive, but it's a progressive illness, and so it progressed from high school sort of all the way up and through my young political career. And around sort of the end of the first term, that sort of addiction to alcohol turned to addiction to cocaine, methamphetamine, and other substances, which of course saw a very rapid spiral for me from, my office in the legislature. I sort of hung up my suit and tie and vanished into the streets of Vancouver, where I lived as a homeless drug addict for, 4.5, 5 years. Those were obviously really dark days for me and my family. But there was, there was a lot of a tremendous amount of learning, I think, that took place for me during that time, as difficult it was, as challenging as it was at a personal level. And so I was on the streets, and I was not the type of addict that just smoked pot and didn't do the dishes, right? I just so everybody's clear, I was in the grips of a very debilitating, very, very sick time. I was thin, 100 pounds, eating out of garbage cans. It was a really quite an ordeal. And, you know, towards the end of my time on the street, when I was sort of, as we say, sick and tired of being sick and tired, I was helped to get into treatment by a young Vancouver police constable who's now an inspector in the department. We still know each other today. I went to treatment. I enjoyed it. I took it seriously. And when I came out of treatment, of course, you have to, as one does, reinvent yourself, and which I did, and went into the treatment field and worked in treatment centers, started getting involved deeply in policy around addiction and mental health, and really rededicated my life to being in service in that way.
Marshall, before we get too much into
Yeah.
that, can I can't help. I want to go back a bit, because a lot of our listeners are political staffers or former political staffers.
Yeah.
And I want to talk a little bit about the time when you were a staffer, and how that staffer culture, and how, the long hours, how the work often tends to move to the bar. Like that for you, was there an unhealthy interplay there for you? And tell me kind of how that really crescendoed to a point that you ended up homeless.
Well, look, there's no question. I mean, not to be too clinical about it, but availability is corollary with harms, right? And in that era of political staffing and politics, alcohol was really a part of the everyday flora and fauna of the work that we did. I think every office had a bar in it. I mean, it was, this was sort of the way that business was conducted in those days. Of course, much has changed today for the better. However, I will say that even today, it is that whole sort of going for drinks or having a drink, the work that circles around that, it is not healthy at a personal level when it is done every day or multiple times a week. And it doesn't necessarily lend itself well to good policy. And so if you are a young political staffer, listening to this as I speak to ours who work for me today, I would say, really be very mindful about these circumstances because, obviously it can get away from you pretty quickly.
Well, that time you came into political life in 2001, it was a new government. Obviously, very strange situation with 77 out of 79 MLAs.
Yeah.
But there are 28 ministers' offices. There's caucus staff. There's all these young people who descended onto Victoria. Many of them didn't know each other. So there's a huge social aspect of like, oh, this is exciting. This is new.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of new friends. And you're right. Every one of those minister suites had a bar, caucus chair. Caucus chair had a practically crates of booze in his office. Not to blame him, but it's pretty easy to get into that cycle. And, a lot of people, yourself, but others as well, get into some trouble.
Yeah, there's no question. Many lose their careers, right? I mean, I've seen many young political staff whose careers have been cut short because of usually behaviors that go along with, being intoxicated, et cetera. But yeah, it can be very detrimental.
Well, there's a flip to this too, I think, because there's some of the struggle can be as the work kind of migrates to the bars and the conversations continue and the kind of the work continues in a way. So if you're not in a position or you're not participating in that, you can feel like you're hampering your career too. And I do think this is improving, but it's such a, whatever side you're in it, whether you're struggling with your relationship to substance use or whether you're struggling to be able to show up for that because of personal circumstances like anything else, it's a culture that, and it's in an environment, let's just name it too, for staffers. Like, it's not like there's great HR infrastructure in place to have your back on this.
That's right. For sure. Yeah, for sure. That's true. And so that was 30 years ago. And so much is different in our communities today, but that, that was the environment. And,
Seems like 30 years ago, not quite.
2020
20,
and
24,
We're not that old, come on.
yeah.
Well,
But,
and
yeah, but I know, Marshall, that you've helped a lot of people who've
Yeah.
worked at the legislature to help
Yeah.
them get into treatment or help them get the support they needed. So
Yeah.
when you'd come out the other side, you had the perspective to see what was happening,
Yeah.
that's still happening among your former colleagues or friends and things like that.
Well, look, I mean, today, obviously, my story is very well known across the country at all levels of governments. And yes, my phone rings off the hook, not only from my fellows who are chiefs of staff running other provinces, but, city councilors, mayors, MPs, MLA, all over the place, with a story, right? And wanting advice. And I think it really goes to show, at this stage in Canada, in our provinces, this is everywhere, right? And I think it's sort of always been everywhere to a certain extent, but we're much more willing to talk about it these days. So
yeah,
Sorry, Kate, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to pick it up where I cut you off, Marshall, because you were kind of following the trajectory and explaining that, I think coming out of recovery, you get particularly interested in sort of the policy around addictions and the opioid crisis.
Yeah. I think for me, it was definitely, it was interested, but it was also, for me in my recovery, it was about how I was going to satisfy that need in my recovery journey to be of service. And in recovery, giving yourself in service to others is a huge part of what we do to stay in recovery, right? And we feel better about ourselves when we help others. And if addiction is a disease of hopelessness and despair, then the antidote to that is lifting your spirit and feeling good about yourself. And so it stands to reason that when you give yourself in service to others and feel good about yourself, that is an antidote, to the problem, and it also helps keep you in recovery. And so it's a required element of my recovery to give myself in service. And so having the luxury of being able to do these things that I'm not only interested in, but I'm sort of good at and I need to do anyway, has been largely beneficial. And so picking up there, I started doing a lot of sort of deep thinking about how dysfunctional the system was, how non-existent a proper system was for people who have substance use disorders or mental health issues. And, calling on my experience as a, policymaker, political whippersnapper, addict, person who had been a correctional officer, but also been a prisoner and, had journeyed through the system. I started to put together sort of a vision for change in terms of what needed to happen. I worked with Dr. Evan Wood, who was a addiction physician in Vancouver. We published a paper, a report called Strategies to Strengthen Recovery in British Columbia. It had a really significant strategy to overhaul that. The BC government at the time was not interested in that strategy. They had gone down a road of a particular model, that harm reduction only model that they were looking at. And, around 2019, when the government in Alberta was elected, I got a phone call from then Premier Jason Kenney's office wanting to know if I was interested in coming to Alberta to help them sort of revamp the system here. They had, the former premier had heard me on the news, and others and read articles and said, hey, we kind of like what this guy's putting down. And so I, again, in, reaching to be kind of the most maximum service that I could be, it was irresistible to me to come and take up that post as chief of staff in the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions office. And that's where my arrival in Alberta happens in 2019. Yeah.
And
So break it down for us, because I mean, we hear a lot, obviously, about the impact of the terrible and tragic overdose deaths that are happening BC, across Canada, across North America. There are different policy responses to that. I'm interested to know how you could describe to us, to our listeners, what you see as the differences in approach that you're doing in Alberta compared to what you left behind in BC.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that it's important to say, and I sort of honor everybody that does work in this sphere. I know that sometimes it can get a little bit spicy as we kind of jab back and forth on it, but everybody wants people to be well. Nobody wants addiction to keep ravaging our communities. And so, I really give a lot of respect and honor to everybody that's working in every aspect of this. However, I think, like you noted, the race is sort of on to find solutions that are going to be effective. And it isn't enough to just have good ideas. You've got to prove them out, et cetera. I think that the difference between what is going on in British Columbia is that, all of the people and the policymakers, the way that British Columbia is organized in order to make these decisions, does not lend itself well to really effective policy and execution in terms of an addiction strategy. And in contrast to Alberta, which, both provinces at this point have roughly the same population. British Columbia has, upwards of 13 separate health authorities, different, geographies for each health authority. Alberta has one health authority. And so there's a lot about Alberta that has lent itself well to the governance conversation about how we are making decisions, how we're able to quickly make decisions and affect their execution on the ground. But fundamentally, the idea is that in Alberta, we have what's called a recovery-oriented model, which means that we feel very deeply committed to ensuring that the bar is high, that we believe that everybody, regardless of severity, has the ability to recover from this illness, and that must be government's top priority when it comes to addiction policy. Is that our job is to make sure that those services are there and available. The addict's job is to take responsibility for their health and to take us up on the offer of that assistance. In contrast, it seems that in British Columbia, there is a different prevailing view in that they believe that it is an addict's right, God-given, charter-given right to use drugs at literally anywhere that they want to, and that government's job is just to make sure that they can do that safely. And we see that, sort of playing itself out. Now, obviously, in British Columbia, there are differently held views as well. There are many in British Columbia who share our view in Alberta. And equally, there are those in Alberta who share the British Columbia view. But we have been very, I think, effective in short order. And while both provinces are still experiencing high levels of fatalities, ours are on the decline quite significantly. Just for example, I was presented on our dashboard that I think this last week we brought emergency EMS calls down from the peak of 300 a week for overdoses down to 100. So we've really significantly reduced that. Fatalities are down significantly off peak as well. That's not happening in British Columbia. So in Alberta,
what do you credit the success of those decline in calls? Is it just recovery, or are you doing other things?
No, well, we do it all, right? I mean, we do, and to be really clear, we do harm reduction in Alberta. There's nobody over here especially myself, that is out there saying, we need to rid ourselves of harm reduction, et cetera. I mean, we have supervised consumption sites. We have opioid substitution drugs. In fact, we have record numbers of these things.
Can you describe, Marshall, because I know your strategy is anchored in these recovery centers. Can you help me on the construction of these recovery centers? Am I using the right term for them? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Recovery communities. Yeah.
Recovery communities. Sorry. Can you describe what's available at these recovery communities?
Yeah. I wouldn't say that our strategy is anchored in it. I think that the recovery communities are a big part of that. And again, so recovery communities are very large, long-term, hybrid housing addiction treatment models. And so it's a lot of birds with one stone. It's detox, treatment, aftercare, and housing all in one facility. And so what happens in a recovery community, first of all, they are about the size of a football field. They're situated on anywhere between 10 and 15 acres of land. They're quite big. And individual Albertans can come and check themselves into a recovery community, and they are able to stay there for up to a year in the facility at no cost to themselves. So Alberta has eliminated all fees for addiction treatment in this province. And so nobody in Alberta swipes their MasterCard to come into any of our treatment centers. We've funded all beds. And so there is no, for an individual Albertan, there is no more difficult decision about, selling their car or getting, their loved one into the care that they need. That is not workable for us. So what happens in the recovery communities is it is a highly structured day that people live. They wake up in the morning, they have breakfast together as a community. They do therapy, they work together, they do, treatment in the evening as well. It is their own community. And so one of the things that I think is important to understand about the model is, and I want to jump to the current situation that is plaguing communities around, like homeless encampments, right? And so this sort of will bring this home to you, is homeless encampments are ugly for most of us to look at. For most of us, we look at that and we say, my God, how could somebody live in there? And for a lot of times there's violence and drugs and craziness, but it is a community, right? As much as it's not a community that the rest of us share a positive view of, it is their community. And what's going on there is keeping them there because they have a belonging, right, to a community that's going on there. So in order to get them out of that situation and into more healthy circumstances, you have to understand that you've got to replace their need to belong to a community, right, at the same time. Otherwise, they'll just come into a clinical treatment process and they'll leave because it's not meeting those needs. Recovery community replaces that, replaces family and community and all of these other needs that they have. It also provides them with a roof over their head, meals, treatment, and everything all together.
Let's talk about treatment of it. Like you were mentioning, sort of there's a broad umbrella really of things that we consider that are called harm reduction.
Sure.
Yeah. So like when you talk about saying, this model is inclusive of harm reduction, what exactly do you mean?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So our model includes really almost the full spectrum of things that are topical that you hear about in the news today. So we have 8 supervised consumption sites in Alberta. We do it very differently than British Columbia does. And we have
how so? How is it different?
Yeah, so in Alberta, the provincial government, on top of the federal government, the Alberta government regulates supervised consumption sites, and we require operators to have a license from the government. It's not just in BC they just need the federal exemption, and you can sort of pop one up. A not-for-profit provider can get the federal exemption and pop one up. In an area. We have an additional layer where we require permission from the province to do that, and that application period is open. You're free to apply to open a supervised consumption site, but there are additional rules that the province has put in place to make that experience more effective and to have better outcomes.
What are those rules? What are those rules?
Those rules are even simple things like your facility must have a toilet. The staff need to have training. The staff of the sites also need to have a criminal record review. You need to have a good neighbor agreement with the people in the community around you. You need to have sign off from the fire department. You need to have engagement and a relationship with the police department. You need to keep and track data of the people who are coming in. And probably one of the most controversial pieces of that is we require that the client on their first visit provide we urge, I should say, it's not a requirement. We'll still let you use the site, but we urge them on coming in to provide us with their personal health number. And when they don't have it or they can't remember it, the staff at the desk has a direct line where they can get their PHN number for the client. And if they absolutely don't have one, then it's incumbent on the operator to help the individual apply for one, and they can come back and get the number. And look, the activists and advocates went ballistic, when we did this. They said that nobody would come anymore. They said that people would surely die, right? That people were going to be forced back out into the sex trade, and all of these horrible things they opined were going to happen. None of that has come true. None of it has come true. They took us to court, they lost, and we have been collecting PHNs and personal health information. Of course, it's anonymized. How that benefits us is that these facilities are actually an extension of the healthcare system. They are not just an extension of an advocacy-driven, not-for-profit world. We look at data. This gives us, for the first time, Alberta is the only jurisdiction in Canada that has true health data on the people who use supervised consumption sites. So we now know things like how many users of consumption sites have hepatitis, how many have HIV, how many need other services, what more services do we need to put in there to help this population. So we do SCS very differently and in a much more comprehensive way in Alberta. SCS is much more a part of the healthcare system. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody's happy, right? We are still, a big democracy, and lots of people are welcome to their opinions. But things are pretty good when it comes to our consumption sites and the way that they're operated here.
So I want to make sure I understand, though, that you're saying, like, if someone doesn't provide the personal health number, they're not going to be refused care.
Absolutely not. They can still go in and use it.
So the other, can I go to the flip side of that real quick? Because the other thing I think that weren't you looking at what is it called? It's the compassionate, that where you can sort of a guardian or the friends and family of someone can require them to receive care.
Yeah.
Because I relate these two things, because I think some of the objections really are rooted in this idea that you're going to scare people from accessing supports, that you're going to have people react, right? So tell me a little bit about that and what you feel like, why you think maybe, I'm assuming, why you think maybe those fears are unfounded.
Yeah, so look, the Compassionate Intervention Act is a law that will be brought into place in Alberta. Obviously, it is done in tandem with a lot of the work that we've already done, which is a massive increase in the availability of treatment. It doesn't make a lot of sense to be creating a system where you're going to put people into treatment if people who are wanting to go to treatment, can't get in. And so voluntary treatment will always be the cornerstone of the Alberta model, right? It will always be what we want people to do. We want people to, come to the sense that what they're doing is really destructive to their health. We want them to go and explore treatment, to get in and have a great experience. However, we also understand that this is an illness that is very confounding. It's an illness that tells you you don't have a problem. It's an illness that tricks you into believing that everything is okay. And often it's an illness that winds up in a fatal situation because of that. And usually the individual who has it is the last person to come to that realization. And so what compassionate intervention does is it seeks to replace what is currently done in the criminal system. So, let's be clear. Right now, every day, for generations, in courtrooms in British Columbia and Alberta and across the country, judges are sending people to treatment. That happens now. There's nothing new about that. That has been going on for years and years. I was sent to treatment, right, by a judge. The difference is that the Alberta model, we don't want people to have to take this journey down a criminal process in order to get that kind of access to life-saving treatment. We prefer that be part of an administrative process rather than a criminal one that is going to hurt an individual's future. And so what the Compassionate Intervention Act does is it allows for a family member, a blood relative, an elder, a police officer, a doctor, a child protection officer, a psychologist, a list. There's a list of people who are able to make an application to a specially appointed magistrate, we'll call them, whose job it is just to review and do these cases, right? So these aren't applications that are going into the big system that's already clogged. These are specifically appointed and trained magistrates that hear these applications and cases. And so obviously that piece of information will come in. It's an integrated court. So it has the ability to kind of look at what's going on with you. And if in the magistrate's view that you are a danger to yourself or others because of drug use, then an apprehension order may be given to have you brought in before the magistrate. Okay. And so then, they come and they bring you to the admission center, and likely after a couple of days, where you're seen by a doctor, you're seen by nurses, you're supervised. When you are deemed to be lucid, right, you'll go before the magistrate, who will have in front of them information about what is going on with you, right? So they'll say, Marshall, I've got this information from your mother. She says that you have stolen $10,000 from her bank account. You were high the other night and burnt the kitchen down, and there's photographs here of it. When you were confronted, you denied all of this. You attacked your brother, etc. The ambulance has been, and I see in your health record, here that you've had 7 ambulance trips. You've been Narcaned 8 times in the last, week. One of them you quite nearly died. What do you have to say? And it just for the record, and just in terms of what this looks like, this is not a courtroom. It's not a guy up on the bench in robes with the coat of arms. This is a boardroom table that looks like a family court process where they're talking to the family and the individual. And we believe that 80% of those people, once they are brought for that conversation, that they will volunteer into a treatment process. But if they won't, then the magistrate will have an ability to make a treatment order, just like is done right now in courtrooms today. The treatment order is kind of like a probation order. Nobody's going to be locked into the treatment center, right? It's they're given an order and they're expected, to go to the treatment center and do the treatment, that they're ordered to do. But look, it's early days in the policy work and drafting, but that is the intent and feel of this. And really, we don't want people criminalized. And I think the difference, I'll just, say this for a moment, the difference between the BC experience and the way that Alberta is approaching it is really about, Alberta is taking the careful time to build out the system and resources that are necessary to make a move from a criminalized process into a healthcare process. British Columbia hasn't done that. They just went to decriminalize the substance with no funding and no additional treatment spaces and no thought given into the process. And that is why I think British Columbia is not seeing any results.
Well, Premier Eby he has kind of openly wrestled with this issue of involuntary treatment, and he had expressed support for it, and he seems to have backed off on it now. So that seems to be where he's at. But I wanted to read to you a quote from our chief coroner, Lisa Lapointe, here in BC, who was recently at a press conference and said, we've seen these ad hoc announcements, but sadly, what we haven't seen is a thoughtful, evidence-based, data-driven plan for how we are going to reduce the number of deaths. And that, as she was in the process of advocating and providing controlled drugs to people without prescriptions, and at that point, the minister—
What could go wrong, Mike?
Well, the minister said, no, we're not going there. So I mean, that's just to get a flavor of some of the disagreements between those two offices. But like Lisa Lapointe's perspective was, she felt, the deaths are increasing, and we've just got to prevent these deaths from happening, period, right?
Yeah. So I think that, let me just say this, David Eby, Premier Eby, and I've had the pleasure of sitting with Premier Eby at various COF engagements. I really enjoy talking to him. He's a good man with his heart in the right place on this issue. I think he cares very deeply about the issue. And I always enjoy my engagements with him on this. I think the minister and Premier Eby were correct in their response to Lisa Lapointe. Look, congratulations to Lisa Lapointe on her retirement. I think that some of the things that Ms. Lapointe has advocated for over the years have been disastrous to the population of British Columbia. So I wish her well in her retirement and thank her for her service.
So very, very different schools of thought, obviously. Look,
let me just say this, and here's where Premier Eby and the minister are right, and Ms. Lapointe is dead wrong. Ms. Lapointe is I think doing her job to advocate for those who can no longer speak for themselves, the deceased, and that is the coroner's job. However, what her view fails to examine is the model that she ascribes fails to look at harms that are created beyond the individual with whom these drugs are given, right? So none of these studies that the so-called safe supply programs are looking at. All of these are very small studies of 20 or 30 people. Most of them are self-report by the addicts who are in the program. And most of them are conducted by the very people who are being paid to administer the program. And none of them, Mike, none of them look at the harms that are created when those drugs are advanced into the community beyond the person who is being studied in terms of diversion. And that is going to be and is starting to be catastrophic to the public health system in British Columbia. So Premier Eby is dead right on this.
Well, let's take it up to the rarefied air of the Rocky Mountains here, and finish with the time we have left here. Just talk to you about your role as chief of staff. My interpretation is that you were one of the few Jason Kenney political staffers who actually backed Danielle Smith in the leadership race, and there may have been others, I'm sure. But
that's not true.
Is that right?
So I made a decision, during the leadership race, that I was not going to back anybody.
Okay.
Quite honestly, Mike, I was busy.
Okay.
Helping people who were running for their lives from opioid addiction, and I just wanted to keep my head down and keep working. That's what I did. We, as an office in mental health and addiction, made a deliberate decision that we were not going to become a part of anybody's leadership.
I have respect for your strategic no, so I just assumed you'd gamed it out.
Yeah, look, it was on the political side, I will say to you and through you to many other young political staff, nobody ever makes friends on leadership campaigns, right? There are only enemies to be made. And so I've been through enough of them in my years to know that, these things are divisive and they can be ugly. And really, honestly, I had other things to do with my time. And so we were very busy in executing on a lot of the things that we were doing here. And so you can imagine my surprise, having never met Danielle Smith before, not having worked on her campaign before. My phone, I was driving down Highway 2, my phone rang, it said Danielle Smith on the thing. Of course, automatically, I thought it was a robocall or some kind of campaign call. And normally I wouldn't answer those, but I did, and it was her. Go figure. And we had a great conversation, and we agreed to meet, which we did, and had a good talk about the kind of leader that she wanted to be, the direction that she wanted to take the province. She was very, I think, intrigued and inspired by the kind of health transformation that we were doing in mental health and addiction, and wanted to look at whether that same kind of success could be brought to broader conversations. And we hit it off quite well, and so she asked me to be her chief of staff. Obviously, when you get asked that question, you do it, right? It's a huge honor. I was very nervous. I didn't know if I had what it took to run the whole province. I often, spent time thinking about the fact that people like me with my background don't, that this is not something that we wind up doing ever. But I'm unbelievably honored to do this job. She is fantastic to work for. She's fun. She's funny. She is wicked smart. She cares unbelievably deeply about Albertans. She works a lot, which of course can keep the phones ringing late at night and early in the morning. But I think that there's a tremendous amount of passion in our Premier's office about kind of getting things done. And so here we are, and here I am. And, every day is awesome. Like even the tough days.
What's your one piece of advice for a political staffer who may inherit the job of chief of staff in a minister's office or premier's office? What's the one thing you'd say to them?
Oh boy, Mike, that's very tough. Always have an umbrella handy. Wear comfortable shoes. I'm being cute, Look, I think that these jobs as political assistants, these are important jobs. They are jobs that can help ministers shape their views and vision. They are important roles. I encourage more people who have an interest in political life to seek out these opportunities, because it's a huge honor to be of service in this way.
And we, just before we let you go, Marshall, we are calling you on an auspicious day, and I can't talk to anyone in Alberta today without getting your reaction to the news. The federal court decision that they ruled that Ottawa's decision to invoke the Emergencies Act in response to the Freedom Convoy protests was unreasonable. What's the reaction over there, live from Edmonton?
Yeah, yikes. I think that the reaction is obviously there's going to be a range of emotions that people go through on it. I don't know if this was just an Alberta thing. There was a lot of people involved in this across the country. So, but from Alberta's perspective, from the folks here where this is an important issue to them, obviously there's going to be a real sense of vindication. I think probably it's going to be very emotional for a lot of people. There were a lot of people who feel that they were really harmed by this. There were bank accounts invaded. There were accounts seized. There were people that may have lost their employment. And I think for a lot of people it was really tough. There were people who were called bigots and racists and tinfoil hat, this, that, and the other thing. So I think there are a lot of people across the country who are looking at this, and I'm sure that if they were somebody who was that impacted, are probably having a bit of an emotional moment, today over it.
Well, and I'd say too, because I think you started there, there's a bit of a theme that is being led by Alberta, and I'd say particularly by your boss, about Ottawa overstepping. So that's sort of, I wonder if that sort of flavors the reaction a bit, because it fits a chorus, I think, that you have been leading in particular.
Yeah. Winning. Yeah. Not to be too cute, but yes, we look at. I think that it should become clear at this point that Ottawa does overstep, right? And they overstep in a way that is arrogant and divisive and harmful to the provinces and the people in them. And it's not just Alberta. And Alberta, what I've come to love about Albertans is they are not afraid to kind of stand up on behalf of, right, for other provinces. I think Albertans are proud to lead that on behalf of. And so, yeah, we're not going to just sit back and allow Ottawa to trample over us and other Canadians. And so we're going to take action to hold them to account. And the courts, who, by the way, the courts who are largely appointed, by them, seem to keep going in our direction. So, we're quite happy about that.
The only trampling of rights that's really happening is the Vancouver Canucks trampling over the Oilers and the Flames.
Ooh.
But we'll get to that in another podcast later.
Way to walk it back.
Mike, I don't know if you've ever been to an Oilers game at Rogers Arena in Edmonton, but I would love to have you out for that. Having been to both, there's just no beating an Oilers game.
Okay, I'll take you up on that. I will take. Hey, Marshall, we know you're a busy guy, and obviously running a province, we really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with us and talk about your passion on the recovery issues and what you've done in Alberta on that, and reflect on your experiences. So we hope you'll come back for another stay at the Hotel Pacifico Alberta Co.
Rockies edition.
Future time. Rockies edition. Some future time.
I'm happy to. You should come for Stampede. We can do a live.
There's an idea.
Ooh,
Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah.
I love it.
All right.
Awesome.
Good.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Marshall. Guests, last week we started talking about the importance of continual network investment to innovation, productivity, and the overall health of the Canadian economy. This week, we're going to get specific. And we're going to tie it into the latest policy move Ottawa has copied from Victoria, the phase out of internal combustion engine vehicles so that by 2035, 100% of cars sold will be EVs. There was a lot of reaction to those announcements, first by the provincial and then by the federal government late last year, particularly from car dealers and manufacturers. But listeners, that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of infrastructure that must be built and built up in order to support the growth of EVs on the road. And here's where it all comes together. That includes reliable and resilient network infrastructure, because charging stations will need to be seamlessly interconnected to enable efficient communication and control between them. 5G networks will enable real-time data exchange between EVs and charging stations, promoting faster and more accurate charging processes. They'll also optimize the distribution of energy across the charging network and reduce strain on the electrical grid. We're not at the minibar yet, guests, but can we all raise a glass to BC's electrical grid for holding strong through that Arctic outflow earlier this month? Our grid is going to need all the connectivity and optimization it can get when a cold snap like that happens in 2030 or 2035. That is why TELUS has partnered with Jolt and Flow to increase the level of EV chargers across Canada. TELUS provides free public Wi-Fi at Jolt charging stations and is increasing operational efficiency of Flow chargers by providing real-time visibility of at least 60,000 of Flow's chargers in Canada and the US. 5G networks are going to be supporting and driving a lot of innovation in the years ahead. But now I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll talk about who's driving next week.
Hello. You've reached the Hotel Pacifico Strategy Suite.
Welcome, Geoff. Always love visiting you here. You take such good care of the suite. It's fantastic.
Well, I have a standing reservation, and I get a corner table at the restaurant too.
That's what we're sticking around for. Well, so actually, on that note, I do think in this case, I did want to chat with you about the interview we just did with Marshall Smith. I mean, in particular, if you want to talk a little bit about, what did you come away with, in the contrast between what BC's doing and Alberta is doing? Is it really that different?
Well, that's a good start because it was a great conversation. And I met Marshall Smith many years ago before he tumbled into the crisis that he described to you. He was chief of staff, or whatever the title was in those days, to Ted Nebeling, who was responsible for developing the Olympic bid in the first Gordon Campbell administration. So interesting guy, and a lot of fun in those days. Also really ready to reach across political boundaries, I would say, when we were in a highly, partisan period. So without diverting into that, but I think, I would tease him to say his endorsement of David Eby was very interesting, but I think Eby can come back from it. But it also points to the confluence of practical opinion about the politics on this. I don't think Marshall's correct to say that there's a free giveaway of drugs in this province, although critics are saying that. By any means. I think the decriminalization project, as David Eby made clear, misfired in terms of not having the boundaries in place before it was established, although the courts have now delayed the imposition of those boundaries. And you were talking earlier about the court's decision with regard to the Ottawa federal court decision with regard to the truckers. So it's a very activist administration we have right now among the judges. And I think that's going to have its own political consequences.
Politico is having a hard time. Yeah. The judges are not helping anybody out. Yeah.
Calgary and Edmonton are having the unfortunate experience of catching up to Vancouver in terms of their overdose death rates. So I would prefer that that we have the experience he's talking about, where there's a declining rate. I'm not sure it's declining yet in Alberta, but to be fair to Marshall, they're just getting their community their recovery communities going and that kind of thing. We'll see. But how can treatment not be part of the equation? And when Dr. Perry Kendall, who declared our health emergency, spoke to the Standing Committee on Health in 2022, he made a point of mentioning Marshall and saying he regretted the very ideological battle we have on the treatment side between abstinence based programs and harm reduction programs, when in Kendall's view, and I think many people's view, you just don't know what will be effective for a given person at a given time. And we need to just flood the zone on all sides on that front. So interesting.
There's
very
so much
interesting.
There's so much to come back to on this. And I think if we come back to this discussion too, I think I'd like to re-examine we really didn't get to talk enough about BC and what actually is happening here. So we'll come back to this one. But thanks for listening in, Geoff. The thing I want to get to actually with the larger group though, is actually we got to go back to the Natural Resources Forum. We got to get the update from Mike on, what was up at the pubs, and a little bit too. Like, I want to hear about the speeches, Mike. What did you hear?
Well, most importantly, the action was at the Black Clover pub on Wednesday night, Kate.
Noted.
But,
Noted. Yeah.
Lots of very happy.
This is how the sausage gets made in the BC
very
resource
happening
sector.
scene there.
Yeah.
The lights went on it too, let me tell you. But just another Wednesday night in Prince George. Tuesday night, we were much more orderly, and Premier spoke. And what was different than last year? Last year there was a lot of comment that as we talked about last week, that he couldn't find his way to talk about natural gas at all last year. And this year there was quite a bit more content on that. A lot of discussion about LNG, as Geoff noted last week. A lot happened between these two forums, such as the government greenlighting the Cedar LNG project. So there's definitely some shout outs for that and the electrification of LNG. And then after the dinner, the Premier attended a reception hosted by unions that have worked on the pipeline. And so he was there kind of with his brothers and sisters speaking at that event. But he showed up, and he did the work that leaders have to do, which is, you're sitting in a hotel banquet room at 10 o'clock at night talking to a bunch of people. That's what you got to do in politics. And he was there. So that was a bit of a, like, I haven't forgotten about you guys. In the meantime, the next morning, 7 a.m. the next morning, Kevin Falcon made his own address to another depressing banquet room, this time at the Coast Hotel, just to set the scene. And the saddest part of that event was that when I got through the breakfast buffet, there was yet one half piece of bacon left. So I did not have the there's more sad stories to come about my trip
Poor
here.
Mike. Yeah.
I know. I had
It's
to
a
have
tough way to start the day.
Did you have to gate check your bag too? Like, this is just a bad run. Yeah.
Well, let's not get into that. But but I, with a half, a rumbly tummy, I listened to the Kevin Falcon speech, which was a good, like, 5-point, fire and brimstone. Here's what I'm going to do on energy stuff and climate. The one that's the point of differentiation there, though, is, he's saying, no carbon tax on home heating fuel, which is echoes of the federal decision from Nova Scotia a few weeks ago.
Mhm.
And he got blown out by the $36 billion BC Hydro capital plan announcement.
$36 billion.
$36 billion.
What was it, Geoff? What was it? Yeah.
$36
Billion.
billion. So, and then the Prince George Citizen put out a rather, saucy
Excellent
editorial. That EB had eaten Falcon's lunch. Now, I don't particularly agree with that analysis, because I think was anyone really paying attention to the speeches?
They did dig his parka though, or they did make a knock at his parka. Is that right? Was that the Prince George?
Whose parka?
At
EB's
EB's
parka.
parka.
He had a parka.
He had
They
like
can make parkas that long, But the hydro announcement, which they obviously put a lot into, $36 billion worth, it had in the normal course of business, it was still going to be a BC Hydro capital plan that was, I don't know, maybe 25 billion. So what's the extra juice here? Well, a lot of that's going to be the Northwest
$9 billion.
Yeah, that's the extra juice.
Well, the extra juice is
That's not enough for you?
Well, it's not power generation.
Okay.
It's not like
Okay.
It's not like they're announcing Site D.
Okay.
There's money going into transmission out to Terrace. So, and some other things too. And I honestly haven't looked at the details. But the point is that
come on.
this is not.
It was a big announcement.
It's a
wide announcement.
I mean, so you were waiting for Site D.
What is
the lack of bacon was like.
How is the? I just like to know how, Geoff. You seem to maybe have read the details. How is the world going to change?
Well, I
as
think
a result of this announcement, other than
something
important infrastructure to service LNG.
If I was to be critical of the government, which is hard for me, as you know, I would say they didn't lay the groundwork firmly enough for how important it is. I mean, we've been waiting to get a deal with Ottawa for a long time to electrify the Northwest, which your government worked hard on too, Mike. It needs to be done. Critics will say, oh, it's all about natural gas. No, it's also about critical minerals. It's about electric vehicles. It's about a whole part of the province that needs more capacity. So deciding to do it provincially and bring in Ottawa if and when they can finally find their way to the agreements they've signed on a number of occasions, I think is great news, because it'll mean that there'll be more certainty around investment up there on a lot of things that are greener than the critics would say. So that's what I thought was good. The other thing about Falcon, which you were there, but maybe he made it later. The heating oil thing was one, but he also seems to have said he will eliminate carbon increases in the carbon tax for the industrial sector, which is basically bringing the carbon tax to a dead halt. And I think that was sort of what happened under your administration, Mike, as well. There was a big, a big pause there. It seems like we're in the same territory now with
Was
Kevin
it
Falcon.
a big pause?
Well, there was no increases in the carbon
Well, I
tax.
think what Premier Christy Clark said at the time was that she wanted the rest of the world to catch up to BC, because BC was sitting there as an outlier, charging the carbon tax, making some of the industries uncompetitive with rival jurisdictions.
Which continues to be the argument today.
Yeah.
But I think what we're left with is not much carbon tax. If he's going to if Poilievre gets in and he's the premier, it'll disappear completely. He's not going to increase it on the corporate side. So we're getting to the point on energy policy, I would say, where we can see a clear distinction between the two parties, the NDP and the BC United, that was emerging before, but is quite sharp now.
Well,
I mean,
go ahead.
I mean, the question is, what is the future of the carbon tax?
Yeah.
I think Justin Trudeau dealt it a serious blow, frankly.
Yeah.
And there are other options like cap and trade. Joe Biden does not have a carbon tax.
Exactly.
No, but so far, Premier Eby seems to be committed to stay the course as part of the Clean BC plan. So we'll see.
Certainly we're right for an interrogation of the importance of that policy to our climate targets, I think. Okay, I'm going to move us along because I do want to do like a really quick check-in, because there was a little mini cabinet shuffle. Mitzi Dean out, Grace Lore in. Geoff, can you talk to me about what this shift is about?
Well, I think it's still about the devastating news that came out of the court proceedings regarding the death of 2 Indigenous kids in the Valley. But that was some time ago. So I'm not certain what inspired the timing right now. It's actually a part of cabinet accountability and ministerial accountability that even if you did or failed to do something that was impacting a particular case, which is very, very unlikely in this case, that you take responsibility for the ministry. So why that didn't happen at the time of the original story, I can't say. But I think that it's clear that Premier Eby has decided to go deeper now, because they also shifted Deputy Alison Bond, who'd been in that role as deputy for many, many years. And I also will say, and I'd be interested in Mike's reaction to this, that the privacy rules, which are very important at one level for protecting families and kids in these circumstances, can bear very heavily on a minister who may have no idea that some of these things are unfolding in his or her portfolio, but be accountable for them in the public eye. And I have a high regard for Mitzi Dean. I think she was a great minister. So I'm very sorry that she's had to take accountability for these just shocking developments that are happening down in the system.
And I should correct myself. She's not out. She's gone over to childcare.
Clearly demoted, though.
Demoted, yeah. Sorry, but I just wanted to clarify, to start, over from Ministry of Children and Families to childcare. Yeah. Sorry, Mike, did you want to react to that?
Well, I mean, there's a couple things. Being the minister of Children and Families is a tough gig.
Yeah.
Very tough.
There's a political graveyard full of former ministers there. And it's, I would argue it's a ministry that doesn't get enough attention from the center. I think there was a moment, in the 90s, I think, when there was just yet another period of terrible deaths in care, where Gordon Campbell had, I think Glenn Clark might have been premier, had kind of stood up and said, let's work together, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And there was a moment of bipartisanship there that kind of then faded away again. But it did lead to the Ministry of Children and Family Protection being set up around that time.
Correct. That's right.
but I know that in the BC Liberal case, there were some ministers that had a pretty good run there, and there were some that had a really tough run, and part of it complicated by independent offices that they either got along with or didn't get along with, because Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafon was in there for a while, and she's a strong personality. So Mary McNeil struck me as a minister who found a good balance and managed to navigate her way through for a time. But yeah, tough gig, no doubt about it. So
Let's raise a glass or take a shot. Time to raid the minibar.
well, I'm going to kick it off just on a couple. I got two. First of all, and both are glasses, raising a glass here. I'm going to raise a glass to Ellis Ross, who has decided to seek federal office. I say that because I'm just glad that Ellis has decided to continue his public service, albeit at a different level. I think he's an important contributor to the public debate. He's one of the very few Indigenous people or First Nations people ever elected to the BC legislature. I think there's only been 5 in history, maybe 6. And there haven't been many First Nations MPs from British Columbia either. So I say, Ellis, it's not going to be an easy fight in Skeena, but good for you, and good for you for taking that step. And I should raise a glass to his wife, who is going to have to put up with a guy who's going to be on an airplane a lot, back and forth.
If he wins, yeah, it's the
Election pending.
worst commute in Canadian politics, I think.
Yeah,
There may be others, but it's among the worst. Yeah.
And we'll note that it was a big week for Polyev out here in BC. He had a rally in Coquitlam the other day for about 1,200 people. These rallies, I got a news report of this rally from for our Ontario listeners. I got a news report from Bob Runciman, the former Solicitor General of Ontario, who's now my friend out here in Vancouver. He comes and visits in Vancouver. Mad Dog Runciman, who's got a book out. He'd like you to know. So you buy Mad Dog's book. There's your plug, Bob. But yeah, he was at the Polyev rally and sent me photos, and he was like, "Yeah, it's a big crowd." So Ellis is part of that, trying to ride that wave. Anyways, second glass, I was going to raise to the Yukon. I was at a Yukon night last night where everyone in the Yukon was out in full force at Roundup, and had brief chats with both the Premier and Ranj Pillay and the opposition leader Curry Dixon. And for those who are looking for a political fix, the Yukon's got a very active political landscape up there. It's a little microcosm. I don't know how many people live in the Yukon. There's about 50,000, 60,000 people and about 100,000 grizzly bears. But it's a fun crowd, and maybe on June 21st, the longest day of the year in the north, we should have a Yukon episode. I'm just going to put it out there.
Here,
See
here.
if maybe the Premier and opposition leader might want to come on.
Yeah.
So we'll see about that.
Throw it
So
out there.
Those are my glasses.
Put it out into the universe, Mike.
Okay, well, I'll toast 3 soon to be departed MLAs as well, very quickly, because the people who would like to replace them are warming up their engines now in the nomination paddock. So one is, of course, Katrina Chan, who announced some time ago that she wouldn't be seeking re-election in Burnaby. The riding there is going to be very appealing to lots of activists in the NDP. Doug Routley, likewise, South Vancouver Island. That one will be interesting because Doug's been there for a long time, very well respected MLA. But probably one where the Green Party, if they're going to make any gains at all, would be hoping to do so. I'm not sure, Mike, if you've taken a look at the numbers there recently, but it's adjacent to 2 existing Green ridings, so maybe. Third one is Nicholas Simons on the Sunshine Coast, also a veteran of probably since 2005. I think he's been in the legislature. So that'll be an appealing one as well for
on the couch and one there, Geoff. As you know, I lived in Ladysmith for about 15 years. And
right.
Routley was safe seat for the NDP, but they take those NDPers, your friends. They have a long historical lineage there. The Sam Guthrie Hall, I believe, in Ladysmith traces back to their icons from the earlier day, and there's a lot of labor history in Nanaimo. Of course, South Nanaimo is part of that seat. So yeah, I'm not so sure the Greens are there. Although Pamela Anderson Green Party supporter lives in Ladysmith.
Yeah.
So there you go. It just occurred to me.
Yeah, you could count on
I'm
Mike
gonna put it-
for the
I'm
very.
going to put it out to the universe right now. Pamela Anderson, you are welcome to come as a guest on our
On
pod.
Hotel
Talk
Pacifico.
about the
Yeah.
Green Party politics.
Yeah, totally.
Vast
Get on that.
vast trove of strange political knowledge Mike McDonald has.
I know. Well, I was going to say, I mean, it was funny. I was having a moment listening to you too. Like we tend to do this political romper room thing where we think retiring politicians, and I really enjoy it. I have to say, you guys, like it's fun because I think we go deeper on some of the history and the writings in a really helpful way. And it's a good contrast to where I want to go today because I want to raise a glass, and I want to raise a glass to someone for sort of, I think, bring me back to a topic that I'm keen to revisit in 2024. So my glass is raised to Alex Hemingway. He's a senior economist at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. He did an analysis just looking at the contrast between the Housing Statutes Act and the housing it's going to generate versus the current policy framework for multi-unit dwellings in Vancouver. And his analysis shows like a 30,000 unit hole, which is material to the overall targets for the or projections for the provincial legislation, which were 130,000. And also just something I'm keen to revisit because it's funny, he characterizes the Vancouver policy as what did he call it? Intentionally unambitious. And I think that's right. I think we've had other discussions about other kind of confounding factors like the view cones and everything else. And I was thinking about it, and it's a bit of I was thinking about it in the context too of we're on track to be Metro Vancouver, 3 million people, with Surrey overtaking Vancouver. And to me, it feels a bit unusual, the setup we have where Vancouver's going to not densify the same way, say a Surrey or a Burnaby will. And the implications of that long-term are actually huge. And so I say this because I'm like, I want to come back to it with the three of us. And I also look forward to recording an episode of Hotel Pacifico in 2035 and being told I was right. But anyway, that's my glass. That's to Alex. That was really meandering. Total contrast to you guys today.
It's a long episode with a lot of meandering.
One of our longer ones. We'll be pithier another time, folks, or try a different podcast if you're looking for pithy. All right. That's it for today. I want to thank Marshall Smith, our guest, Marshall Smith for joining us today. And I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, again, for making Hotel Pacifico possible. We'll see you next week, guests. BC, you can never leave.
Checkout time at Hotel Pacifico. We hope you enjoyed your stay.